very, very pleased, said enough here, very pleased to introduce our speaker. Some of you know Syed. He did a master's degree here in the Faculty of Management. Was it Dillon School?
No,
Faculty of Management,
that's right.
with John Usher. And John came to me and said very good things about Syed. And so we took him on as a PhD candidate, first of all in demography, a program which incidentally is now dead, I'm told. They erased it from the books. Why, I don't know. I wasn't consulted. And then in the political, social, cultural thought PhD program for a short time. Then he moved to Calgary, and he's done very well in Calgary, I must say, very well. He's now a PhD candidate, which means he's working on the thesis. He's done everything else. He sailed through that. He also was nominated by the University of Calgary for a SSHRC dissertation fellowship, doctoral fellowship, which are very hard to get, extremely competitive. He got it. So this is a guy who's doing very well indeed, and we're delighted that he offered. He told me he'd like to come back and talk about his research, and I said, yeah, you got to do that. So we welcome him to come back and talk about his very interesting research. He's going to talk for about 40 minutes, he said, approximately, and then we should have time for questions. Now, some people have to leave a little early because of teaching and other things, so don't worry about it. If you have to leave, you leave, and Syed won't take it personally, of course. So this is his title, and we're very glad to welcome you back to Lethbridge from Calgary.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here. As a previous student of this university, I feel honored to be presenting here, and I would like to especially thank Dr. McDaniel for giving me this opportunity. The topic that I'll be discussing today is with regards to how do we understand Muslim views, that is their intergroup attitudes towards others, their views about others, and about their religion. Now, the ramification of understanding this issue or this topic is that it is also linked with the issue of Muslim migration to the West. Because for many politicians and intellectuals, there's this idea that Muslims who are coming from the Muslim world, they have a bit more difficulty, or there's more challenge of them integrating because their social views differ from what is espoused by a liberal democratic society. And so the approach that they take usually is considered, and so that's the reason I have titled this as the intergroup sentiments, interpretations of Islam among Muslims. By that I mean both the majority population and the minority population, and I'm looking at the role of social interactions and demography in changing their views about intergroup attitudes and interpretations of Islam. So, when I was talking about this perspective, this concern that many people have, Muslims integrating, issue that is in terms of it's difficult, it is challenging because their social views differ from what is espoused by a liberal democratic society. And I mentioned that there are many politicians and many intellectuals. The predominant perspective that they take to understand Muslims' intergroup attitudes and their views is that Islam influences them. So in other words, for many people, they are of the view that to understand what Muslims believe, to understand what Muslims view about society, about others, we need to go back to Islam. We need to study Islam. So this is considered as the civilizational perspective, that Islam is the major variable or one of the major variables that influences Muslim views. Here's the challenge that many people face, and that is, what is Islam? You have difference of opinion as to what Islam stands for. Within the Muslim community, starting from the earliest time, you had different school of thoughts developing about what is Islam. They would have the same literature of the Prophet, the Hadith, and yet they would give different interpretation. I'll just quote two people, for example, who take this perspective. One is Sam Harris, another is Amitabh Bell. Both are non-Muslims, but for one, Sam Harris, this is what he had said. He said that we are at war with precisely the vision of life that is prescribed to all Muslims in the Quran and further elaborated in the literature of the Hadith. Whereas another scholar by the name of Amitabh Pal writes a book entitled Islam Means Peace. And then he says that Islam is a peaceful religion. Now, when you're going to these theological discussions, there will be diversity of opinions because people are coming with different perspectives. Anyone who has studied Muslim jurisprudence, Muslim theology, will see these differences of opinion. And so then the question is that, can we use such a perspective to understand? And then how do we define that? So these are challengeable issues, and that is why certain scholars are now suggesting that we need to move to a relational perspective. The relational perspective recognizes that changes in the social reality of Muslims influences their views about religious teachings and Muslim intergroup attitudes. So in other words, the type of experiences, the type of social reality they are perceiving in terms of their interactions with others and in terms of the institutional experiences they're having influences them. And so rather than focus on a theological discussion to study Muslim views, whereby we are going into metaphysical topics or legal theories within Islam, the focus should be on moving from theological to the social influence on Muslim views and Islam. In other words, it is the social element that needs to be the focus of study. Theoretical work has been done, some literature has been worked on this. However, in terms of studying a large segment of Muslim populations, taking this type of an approach is still perhaps missing. And so, in this study, my focus is to look at the social element and see whether there's an impact that is changes Muslim teachings, that is Islamic teachings, and their intergroup attitudes. To understand the social reality, to understand the social element, I've taken a theory that is known as the intergroup contact theory. The intergroup contact theory suggests that when there is social contact between two social groups, it weakens negative perception that they have of each other. There are certain scholars have mentioned 4 different facilitative conditions. These are not necessary conditions. So for example, they say that in order to have a positive experience, a positive outcome coming from these types of interactions, you need to have people having equal status, working on a certain goal. There's cooperation and there's institutional support. However, recent study by PEW, for example, did a meta-analysis study, found that this is not necessarily the case. These are more like facilitative conditions. If they are, fine, but even if they don't exist fully, still, when members of 2 different groups are interacting, it can lead to positive views, or at least reduce the prejudicial views towards each other. So that's one thing. The second component is that with this contact theory, suggestion was the improvement of intergroup attitude. But an outcome, a byproduct of this has been also that religious tolerance also perhaps appears among different group members when they interact. And so I've cited a number of authors who have suggested that when Muslims and non-Muslims are interacting, it is possible that religious tolerance is also appears. And the reason is, and I'll give you this as an example that actually happened with a friend of mine who came here. So he comes from South Asia, and he meets people, non-Muslims, and they helped him a lot while he was settling down. And then he asked a question, a theological question. The question was salvation. And he said to me that, are Muslims only destined to go to heaven and not others? So he was asking this question because for him this was a positive experience that made him realize that there are others from other communities who he has met are good people. So he started to think about his value about the salvation issue, which I'll be discussing further because this is one of my dependent studies. And so what happens is that scholars have suggested this because there is a cognitive dissonance that is created in the mind. Because you see people who you had assumed before meeting differently. And now that you have had that interaction, you are trying to reduce that cognitive dissonance, and therefore you're going to try to find a form of religious interpretation that suits your social condition. In fact, and this is not covered in the topic, but part of this whole thing, out of all this interaction, has actually emerged a school of thought that is known as fiqh al-aqliyat, Muslim minority jurisprudence in the West, that is more, that presents views that are more open, tolerant, and that are challenging pre-modern traditional interpretations of Islam. So this is the suggestion of intergroup contact theory. A, weakens negative perceptions, and the byproduct of that would be perhaps also religious tolerance would also emerge. Yet within this field, there are certain research gaps that perhaps need to be looked into further. The first is not much research has been done to understand how different forms of interactions affect Muslims' intergroup attitudes and their religious views. What do I mean by that? So your interactions can be at a personalized level, that is through cross friendships, or intergroup friendship, or that can happen through group level, that is through sitting in these gatherings and meetings. So what is the effect of this? Usually the studies that have focus have been done on a few countries or that in a Muslim minority population. So then the question is that, is this effect, what is the impact of this interaction in different populations? Because as I mentioned, previous studies have not looked at a cross-national study, and by that I mean multiple countries with different populations of Muslim population proportions. So we need to consider that as well, their population, minority, and majority. And that we do know, research suggests that religiosity has a negative impact in terms of intergroup attitude. So then the question is that, does personal relationships, friendships for example, close interaction, do they moderate this relationship, this association? So these are the research gaps. Based on that, these are my following hypotheses. A, social context would lead to more positive intergroup attitudes. Social context will result in more open, tolerant Islamic teachings. Group size moderates the contact prejudice effects. And intergroup friendship moderates religiosity impact on intergroup attitudes. So what is my methodology? I have used 2 data sets that have 38 countries, that have Muslims population in 38 countries. More than 25,000 respondents total who have participated in this. My dependent variable are the Muslim intergroup attitudes and their religious views. Focal variable are 3, close friendship, interfaith meetings, and non-Muslim family members. Country level variables are Muslim population proportion and HDI, Human Development Index. And my controls are age, gender, marital status, religiosity, education, subjective economic well-being, perceptions of economic standing of one's country. I'm going to speak more in detail about these now. The first is with regards to data. So the first data that I've used is the world's Muslim data set. This has following countries that they went and they had respondents from. So these are 23 countries. And as you can see, the population density proportion of Muslims are different in different countries. Thailand has 6%, and then you have overwhelming majority countries. You might also notice that these areas are not particularly focused in one part of the world. They're in different places. Southeastern Europe, Southeast Asia, South Asia, MENA, Middle East, North Africa. With that, the second data is more focused on Africa's Muslim data set. And these are from PEW. These are secondary data that they had compiled. The first one was done in 2012, so I'll just go back. This was done in 2012. These are the Muslim population proportion. Those are the sample size in each country. And then I had 15 more countries from sub-Saharan African region. And as you can see, again, I've mentioned the Muslim population proportion. It's from minority to majority with different sample size. So in total, 25,000 Muslim respondents from 38 countries. My next step is with regards to variables that I'll be talking about. What were my focal variables? So I have broken them into each data set. So for the first data set, which is the World Muslim data set, these were the two variables that I've chosen in terms of close friends. I've done a recoding for these variables to fit this study. So for example, the close friends was asked how many Muslim friends do you have who are close friends. So implicitly those who had less, when they had more non-Muslim friends. And second is with regards to do you participate in interfaith gatherings? For the second one, Africa's Muslim data set, again, it's have you participated in interfaith gathering? Yes or no? And you have immediate non-Muslim family members. So immediate non-Muslim family members like brother or sister. So again, this was coded. These are my focal variables. These are my independent variables. My intergroup attitude variables were that two different sets of questions were asked in World Muslim data set and Africa's Muslim data set. The first was with regards to how comfortable would you be supposingly if your son marries a Christian? Now chances are Muslims might be more comfortable with this because religiously speaking, it is majority of Muslim scholars have permitted a male to marry a non-Muslim female, a man to marry a non-Muslim woman. Yet, in the pre-modern Muslim literature, you will not find any scholar giving the permission that a Muslim woman can marry a non-Muslim man. So this is, you'll find a lot of difference of opinion in pre-modern Muslim literature, but this view is not there. And so the second question was asked about this, that if your daughter marries a non-Muslim, would you be comfortable or not? So assuming, that Islam doesn't allow, so probably they wouldn't feel comfortable. And then the question is that if they have social contact with other social groups, would they have more comfort with that? And if that is the case, then it shows that social elements do influence their views. With regards to African Muslims data set, the question was asking about your child. They didn't specify gender, so they just asked, and whether your child, would you be comfortable? And so they have been combined in two levels. One is not at all, not too comfortable, and the second is somewhat very comfortable. So there's that level of no comfort, and then there's a level or degree of some level of comfortability. And then the next question was asked, do you trust those with different religious values? Yes or no? The next question was with regard, the next variables that I've chosen for as my dependent variables on religious views is the first one is many religions can lead to eternal life in heaven. In the pre-modern literature of Muslim theology, overwhelming majority of scholars have argued or have given this view that it is only Muslims, that it is only Islam is the one true faith leading to life in heaven. And then so this question was asked to others, to Muslim respondents, that do you think Islam is the one true faith, or do you think many religions can lead to eternal life in heaven? So this is one dependent variable. The second was that do you think there are multiple interpretations of Islam, or do you think there's only one true interpretation of Islam? Similar question was asked to Muslims in Africa. First one was that many religions can lead to eternal life. However, they didn't use this word in heaven. And so perhaps some people might take this, so it's not as, you can say, definite in terms of the interpretation that will be coming forward when you look for the first one. Because in the first one, the question is being asked that many religions can lead to eternal life in heaven. And so the question is that here's what the Muslim clerical interpretation is. Are Muslims taking that view even when they have friendship with other social groups, or are they challenging or taking this other perspective? So the procedures that I've taken are logistic regression, because my DB had a categorical variable. So there's that likelihood of either having more positive intergroup attitudes and more tolerant religious views. And I have done interactions then for my further hypothesis. now the results that I'll be presenting, I've tried to simplify it as much as possible. I have not shown all the steps that I've taken. I've tried to show the gist of the results, but this is, I did a lot of coding for this. I went and for each country, I've actually done logistic regression. I ran them. I had to check, for example, whether they're meeting all these assumptions or not. But the final picture that I'm presenting is a simplified version of my results. So the first hypothesis is that social contexts lead to more positive intergroup attitudes. Now, this slide is showing results of the pool data. That means aggregated data. So the first one, Muslim World Dataset, has the results from 23 countries. Question was asked to them, son marrying a non-Muslim, how comfortable would you be? So those who had close friendship with non-Muslims, the odds ratio is 1.87, and then these are 3 asterisks, and then you have change in probability. Now, as you can see, all of them are positive, and they have these 3 asterisks. What does that mean? So, odds ratio means, as you can see here it is 1.87. If this was 1.00, then we would have said that there's no effect of close friendship with non-Muslims on their views about intergroup attitudes. But because this is 1.87, what it means is that the law of the probability that a person who has friendship with non-Muslim is more likely to be comfortable with his or his son marrying a non-Muslim compared to someone who does not have or who only has close Muslim friends. So in other words, if I do the logic probability, what it means is that if I control for all variables, and I've been controlling for all variables, if I control for all variables, someone who has close friendship with non-Muslims has an 11% chance more likely of having or being more comfortable that his son has married a non-Muslim compared to someone who does not have any close non-Muslim friends. Interfaith meetings. You can see it is positive. It has impact. But continuously the impact is less. If you compare both the type of high personalized relationship with interfaith meetings, you're going to be seeing that close friendship has a higher value. You can see even in the case of Africa's Muslim data set, it is the same thing, that those who have immediate non-Muslim family members, the odds ratio, for example, in the case of your child marrying Christian, is 2.11, so that's like 111%. That's the odds ratio of being more likely to be comfortable. And you can also see when it comes to the issue of daughter marrying a non-Muslim, which in Muslim theology, in Muslim jurisprudence, it is not being given permission by the cleric, and this is the position of the Muslim scholars or Muslim clerics. Yet when Muslims have close friendships with non-Muslims, they are quite comfortable. The odds are they're more comfortable as compared to those who do not. And by these 3 stars asterisk, what I'm trying to say is that the likelihood of getting this result by chance is extremely rare. It's extremely rare. Now, of course, you might say, well, this is pooled data. What about individual countries? Your individual countries might be different. And so I did logistic regression for each of these countries then. But before that, going to that, I've just spoken about intergroup attitudes. Let's look at the religious views. Does impact of social contact is there an impact of social contact on religious views? Again, you can see close friendship with non-Muslims, the likelihood is, the odds ratio is 1.91. That means you're more likely, significantly likely, to believe that many religions can lead to heaven if you have friendship with non-Muslim compared to those Muslims who do not have any non-Muslim friends. So you can see again it's significant, except in interfaith meeting. You can see that when it comes to more than one true interpretation of Islamic teachings, interfaith meetings is not significant. NS means that it is not significant. What is suggested that we cannot be that confident that there is any interaction. And you're also noticing that it seems highly personalized interactions tend to have a more effect compared to something that is at the group level. But then again, this is pooled data. Perhaps question can be raised, what happens at the individual countries? So let's start with the individual countries. Influence of social context on intergroup feeling, son marrying a non-Muslim. So the first row about supporting and significant, let me just explain that briefly. So this is the Muslim world data set that I've used, so 23 countries. Supporting and significant means that when you have close friendship with non-Muslims, you are somewhat very comfortable if your son marries a non-Muslim. And supporting significant means that this result has come and it's extremely unlikely to come up by chance. And this is at the 0.05 significant level. So there's a really high accuracy that this data, the results are not coming by chance. Supporting and non-significant means that yes, there is that relationship. Again, it's a positive relationship between friendship and intergroup attitude, positive intergroup attitude, yet we're not that sure at the 0.05 level. Not supporting, not significant is that you can't be sure whether there is a relationship or not. And the last one, not supporting significant, means that it is the inverse. It is the opposite of what the hypothesis was suggesting. So when the suggestion was that social contact will lead to positive intergroup attitudes, what has happened is that it has not led to positive, it's rather leading to more prejudicial views. So if we look at close friendships versus interfaith meeting, let's start with the close friendship. Out of 23 countries, 18 countries, the data that from these 18 countries supported this hypothesis. That person was asked, they are very somewhat comfortable. 78%. Compare that to interfaith meeting. Same question was asked, of course, this impact only 8 countries. You compare that with in terms of interfaith meeting tending to have supportive hypothesis, you have data that is supporting the hypothesis, but it is not significant. That tends to be higher in interfaith meeting as compared to close friendship. And yes, you can see that there are a couple of countries that have a negative impact. But overall, we do see that when we're comparing the effect, it seems as if close friendship has a more is a higher degree of effect as compared to interfaith meeting. Yet, interfaith meeting has an effect, it's just that we are not that confident of the results. Let's look at the daughter marrying a non-Muslim. Would you be comfortable? Now, as I've mentioned, in the tradition, generally this has not been, it has not been given permission by the Muslim clerics, yet when this impact, you look at it, when you have close friendships with non-Muslims, those Muslim respondents out of 23 countries, 12 say that they would be comfortable or somewhat comfortable. So more than half of the respondents is kind of saying that. So that's 52%. Compare that to interfaith meeting. You'll see, again, there's that difference. Look at the level of supporting and not significant one. You'll see the same thing, that interfaith seems to have that effect, but we're not able to say with full confidence that their effect may not have come by chance. So, same thing, we're seeing the same results here. Let's look at the Africa's Muslim data set. 2 variables, again, this one is at the group level, and then you have immediate non-Muslim family members. How comfortable would you be if your child marries a Christian? You can see the second bars in each of these levels showing, for example, supporting and significant 8 countries. So, again, when people have family members or close friends who are non-Muslims, its effect seems to be much more compared to other variable, that is the interfaith meeting. The second question was asked about trusting people with different religious values. This is the Africa's Muslim data set. Interfaith meeting only had a supporting significant effect in 1 country out of 15 countries. So the Africa's Muslim data set has 15 countries. And you can see here you have 5 countries. So it seems, again, there is somewhat of an impact. Now let's see in terms of, so we have spoken about the intergroup attitude. We have kind of established that social context can lead to more positive intergroup attitude. Let's look at whether that is the same case when it comes to religious views. Because if it does affect, then the notion that Islam is influencing Muslims' views about even religion or other is problematic, because then we have to agree that it is perhaps Muslims that define what is Islam. So, first question was asked, again, to those, many religions can lead to eternal life or not. And Two types of independent variables, close friendship and interfaith meeting. Again, you can see the difference. That out of 23 countries, those who had close friends, who were non-Muslims, when they were asked about this, out of these 23 countries, 14 countries have said that many religions can lead to eternal life in heaven. This goes against the pre-modern classical interpretation or view with regards to the topic of salvation. You compare that with interfaith meeting, you'll see that it is significant, it is supporting, but it's not in as many countries. But if you look at the supporting and non-significant, you'll see again, interfaith has that impact, but we're not so sure. Let's look at about this issue of more than one way to interpret Islamic teachings. Again, you can see those who have close friendship, highly personalized interactions. They believe that there's more than one true interpretation of Islam. Compare that to those who are involved in interfaith meeting, controlling for all other variables. There are only 4 countries. So again, you're seeing this difference. And again, you can see that interfaith has an impact, but we're not so sure. There are 9 countries, 39%, that are supporting, but they're not significant at the 0.05 level. Do we see the same thing in Africa's Muslim data set? Question was asked about many religions can lead to eternal life. You can see that those who have non-Muslim family members, there are 8 countries supporting and they're significant, and these are 53%. Compare that to interfaith meeting, that is 20%. So again, it seems out of all these countries, the 38 countries, you're having a general trend. You're seeing that contact interactions are influencing not just intergroup attitudes of Muslims, but also their religious interpretations are differing as well. Question was asked about more than one way to interpret Islamic teachings. Here, it's not the case. Here, interfaith meeting has had a bit more, but there might be, once after this is done, I can talk perhaps further about as to why this might be the case, that when you have non-Muslim family members, you think that there are only respondents in 2 countries who say that there are more than one way to interpret Islamic teaching, that there's more than one true way to interpret Islamic meetings. So we have seen that there seems to be an impact. Now the second question is with regard to group size. Literature differs about this. There are some who are of the view that minority population would show more intergroup bias compared to majority. But then there is some more literature that suggests that majority would show more compared to the minority. So let's see, based on this data, what is happening. And I've just focused on the Muslim world data set, the 23 countries. And I've only plotted 4 countries for the sake of making the graph more clear. So I'm arguing that there is a moderating impact. So let's see if that is the case. Before that, the intergroup attitude variables are on 2. Son marrying a non-Muslim and daughter marrying a non-Muslim. So I want to see whether population size does matter. So as you can see, on the x-axis, you have 2 categories. One is you have only close friends who are Muslims, and you have non-Muslim close friends. You can see these 4 lines. They are of different Muslim they're representing different Muslim population proportion. The blue line is 6%, so that is Thailand, Muslims in Thailand. Bosnia, then you have Muslim population 70, and then you have 99%. As you can see, when you have only Muslims, people are generally not comfortable. They're not comfortable. But the moment they have non-Muslim friends, each of the populations level, there are differences. However, you can see that the highest impact tends to be at the level where their Muslim population is a minority. And so as the Muslim population is increasing, it seems the effect is reducing compared to other Muslim population. But that effect is stronger if we do a within-country analysis. This is for the question about son marrying a non-Muslim. What about a daughter marrying a non-Muslim? We see similar results. We see again those who have only Muslims as close friends. They do not show that much comfort. But when respondents had non-Muslims as close friends, you can see there is that differences within country, but then you can also see the differences at the population level. So it seems when Muslims are minority And when this impact happens, that is this interaction, social contact, it seems to have a more of a positive impact compared to when Muslims are in majority. And my last hypothesis with regards to close contact moderating religiosity's impact on intergroup attitude. Literature suggests that the more a person is religious, the less likely he or she would have a positive intergroup attitude. Fair enough. But what is the impact of having interactions with other social groups? What would be the impact, for at least in this case, Muslims, when they have close friendship with non-Muslims? So again, my intergroup attitude views that I have are son or daughter marrying a non-Muslim. For the first one, comfortable with son marrying a non-Muslim, if you see at all levels, so the x-axis has the importance of religion in your life. Question was asked about how important is religion in your life. It starts from not at all important to very important. As you can see, yes, when a person is becoming more religious, tends to be perhaps less comfortable. However, compare that with a person having the same level of religiosity, but having non-Muslim close friends. If you see the red line, that is an individual, a Muslim respondent, having non-Muslim as close friends. Look at the level at the not at all important. Someone who has only Muslim friends with someone who has non-Muslim friends. Again, you see the person who has non-Muslim friends tends to be more comfortable. Yes, it goes down when a person is becoming a bit more religious, but again, you can see that difference between someone having close friendships with non-Muslims compared to someone who has only close friendship with Muslims. And this goes on even when a person is becoming more religious. What about in the case of a daughter marrying a non-Muslim? We see similar trend. We see again that those people who have only Muslims as close friends, you compare their comfort level with those who have friendship with non-Muslims. You'll see there's that difference again. So we can see that even your social contact is influencing the effect of religiosity on one's intergroup attitude. So then, in conclusion, what does it suggest? The results so far suggest that contact with non-Muslims do result in positive intergroup attitude and inclusive religious beliefs. And that intergroup friendship, that is high acquaintance, is more, has a more effect compared to interfaith type of meetings. And that the effect of intergroup friendship is significant among different populations, but that it shows that as the population is increasing, the effect tends to be less. And that intergroup moderates, friendship moderates the effect of religiosity on intergroup attitudes. So these are the conclusions, but what are its implications as well? The first is that perhaps we need to shift from the civilizational perspective, whereby we are assuming that Muslim views about others and even about religion is based on some Islamic teaching. We cannot define exactly what Islamic teaching is. And so perhaps the better course of action is to look at their social element, that is their social reality, see those factors, and then perhaps it can give us a better general trends as to what Muslims are believing. So, and this cannot just be at the current research about Muslim, but this can perhaps also go into historical research as to why there are different Muslim school of thoughts. I don't want to go into this detail of the theological discussion, but if anyone is interested, one can look at the Hanafi school of thought with the Maliki school of thought, and they will see that social conditions, social environment had an impact on that. Even the founders had different views because they had a different social upbringing. But then, in this research, I have not looked at what is the effect of discrimination, because discrimination can also impact this relationship. Those two countries that were showing that, when there was a contact, but still there was negative views, there was prejudice, it might be because that impact, that the relationship they're having is based on a form of perceived discrimination, perhaps. And so we have to be cognizant of this view that about the perceived discriminations between social groups and also the actual conflicts. And next is that we have to also, the next step is we have to see whether these findings are also holding when we study Muslims in the West. That is, their impact, their interactions with host society members, does it lead to more positive intergroup views and tolerant religious views? Thank you very much.